Let's go ahead and get started, everybody. I'm going to invite you to open up your Bibles to the book of Habakkuk. I'll give you a minute to find the book of Habakkuk. It's in the Old Testament. It's past the big prophets into the small prophets. We call them the minor prophets, not because they are not major, simply because they are small. This one is especially small, just 3 chapters. We got a few more weeks in the minor prophets. And then we'll move on. I don't know what's next. You know, Kyler he plans out the schedule. And so sometimes Foundations is designed to give us Bible. So we go through learning books of the Bible. I think everybody should know the books of the Bible and what each one has. Today we'll talk about, my goal is you walk out, you have a little bit of a handle on the book of Habakkuk. So you get handles on the Bible. The other is theology. So oftentimes each semester we'll go through, and when we're doing theology, we'll go through certain doctrines so you have a handle on the doctrine. And then the other is church history. Sometimes we'll spend 6 weeks. I think every Christian ought to have some kind of handle. You don't have to be an expert, just some kind of handle on where we came from, that we didn't just emerge in 2024 as Southern Baptists. Or at this church, what is our history? There's a long, wonderful history behind it. So that's the design of Foundations, is to have church history, good theology, and the Bible. So we are in minor prophets. We're in Habakkuk, and it is an interesting book. Let me say a word of prayer, and we'll get started. Father, thank you for the fellowship of believers. Thank you for the church. Thank you for men and women that love Christ, love the church, love their families. Thank you for that. Thank you for the blessing that is. We take it seriously. Thank you for all of the children that are learning the Bible now. We pray that you would open their minds and hearts to receive your word. Thank you for all the volunteers, the coaches that are working hard with them. Thank you for the students that I saw coming in tonight. Thank you, Lord, for all of those that will work with students. We pray for our middle school and high school and even our college students, that they might take what it means to follow Christ seriously. Thank you, God, for bringing them here tonight. Help us now as we open up the book of Habakkuk. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. This past weekend, I, after church, went to Louisville, Kentucky, to the Southern Baptist Theological Seminary in Louisville. If you don't know much about Southern Baptist Convention, we have 6 seminaries, and the one in Louisville, Southern Seminary, is the largest of the 6 seminaries. Not only the largest of the 6 seminaries, it's the largest seminary in the world, besides Liberty University. And they're just larger than everything. But in our convention, it's the largest, and I'm on the board of trustees there. And this, because I'm not just on the board, I'm the new president. So I got to preach in chapel, which is terrible. You know, I see you guys every week, and I've been doing this with you for, 14, almost 15 years. You get things. If I say something that's not completely right, you're pretty forgiving. You stay with me, you pay attention, it's home. You go to chapel, those people are not like that. It's professors that are experts in their field. They're the very best when it comes to Bible scholars. And then it's seminary students who think they're the best. And so either way, you're going to be criticized by those that legitimately can criticize you or the students that feel like they can. And preaching there on Tuesday just was a reminder to me how much I like preaching to my people, the church. When you open up the book of Habakkuk, what you hear him say is that it's an oracle. You see it right there in verse 1, the oracle. The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. The oracle, that word can be translated a lot of different ways. One way to understand it is he has a burden. We don't know if this was written to Israel. We don't know if this is written to Judah. What we know is life at that time is horrible. The Bible's been neglected. Justice is perverted. It's an unusual little book. It's an unusual book because it's not just him standing and preaching. Like when you go and read Jonah, you have him go to Nineveh and he says all these terrible things to Nineveh, just preaches to the people. That's not what Habakkuk is. It's not addressed to anybody. He doesn't stand up and pronounce judgment on Judah. He doesn't stand up and pronounce judgment on Israel. So let's just start, if you got an outline, let's just go through the outline. The intro would be, it's an unusual book. It's very short. It's not addressed to Israel or to Judah. The date of Habakkuk, you have to kind of guess when it is. So remember the timeline. If you start in 722 BC, remember BC, you're going backwards. 722 BC, that's the fall of Israel. So you keep going backwards. You get to 640 is Habakkuk, and then 586 is the fall of Judah. 586, fall of Judah, 722, the fall of Israel, in the middle, and about 640 or so, you have Habakkuk. Now, what's going on in that time, what's happening politically is Assyria is on the decline. So remember you have these empires. The Assyrian Empire was first, then the Babylonian Empire was after that. Then after the Babylonians, the Persians came in. After the Persians, the Greeks came. Alexander the Great came and beat them up. After the Greeks, and then the Romans came in. I'm reading, by the way, I'm reading a book right now on the Eastern Roman Empire in Byzantium, in Constantinople. It's a fascinating book. It's too many pages, but it describes the rise of Christianity in the East and how Rome will finally split. After Rome, then you have all of Europe. Right now, the Assyrians are on the decline, the Babylonians are on the rise. All we know about the author is his name. His name is Habakkuk. And it's hard to even know what his name means. It might mean embrace. Some commentators say that his name means to rest, to fold his hands and rest. But his name doesn't inform the book. Doesn't really change anything. We just have his name there. This is the burden of Habakkuk. What's the purpose? The purpose of these 3 chapters, and they're fascinating, these chapters are. The purpose, if I had to put it in a sentence or close to a sentence, would be, by the way, this is how I try to structure a sermon, is when I'm preaching a sermon, I'll do an introduction and then tie it to the Bible and then have the sermon in a sentence. This is the statement that comes up on the screen. Then after that, we go through and make sure that whatever you're saying comes from the Bible. So what is this about? The purpose is God knows what He's doing, even when it doesn't look like it. If I had to read Habakkuk, find out what it means, it would be, God knows what He's doing in your life, even when it doesn't look like it. So when I say God knows what He's doing, I mean the meticulous sovereignty of God. Be careful how you say sovereignty. Sometimes we say God's in control. We'll use that as a blanket statement, and we don't follow through with what that means. When I say the sovereignty of God, it's not just that God knows what is going on. I mean more than that. I mean that God is actively and intentionally and purposefully involved in the minute details of life. That there is not one atom in the universe that is in rebellion, being controlled by God. Controlling every moment, and doing so for a cause. Now look, if you can get that in your mind and heart theologically, if you can have that, so our doctrine should translate into devotion. If you can have the understanding of God in and acting and doing, it takes out worry. This is how it helps me not to worry, because I'll be prone to it, is I think about our good God in absolute control. Every moment for a cause, that God is working toward an end. You feel like you've been on some weird journey, you've had some tragic things happen, and some of them seem random. Just remember, you read the Bible, you find out that God is working these things together. So you read Habakkuk, and it reads a lot like a lament. A lament. A lament is like almost a weeping, a complaint. Oftentimes that's how the Psalms, if you're reading the Psalms, many times in the Psalms will be a lament. Habakkuk sounds like a lament. So let's just go to the outline. I'll give you an outline of Habakkuk. It's a simple outline. It really doesn't have very many points in the outline. It's the introduction. The first one is the introduction. That is chapter 1, verse 1. It says, the oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. So there's the intro. Okay, then the 2 chapters are in cycles. So here's the second point, part of your outline. The first cycle is chapter 1, verse 2 through verse 11. And so you have, the way it's structured is Habakkuk says something, God answers. Habakkuk says something, God answers. So Habakkuk's lament, we can just read the whole thing here, in verses 2, 3, and 4, and then God answers in verses 5 through 12. So let's go to it. Let's just use the Bible here. Verse 2, here's his lament. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you not hear? Or cry to you violence, and you not save? Why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me, strife and contention arise. The law is paralyzed, justice never goes forth. The wicked surround the righteous. So justice doesn't go forth, it's perverted. That's his complaint. Why do bad things happen to good people? Why is this going on? So you get that feel in verses 2 through 4. So then after the complaint, then you have God's answer in verse 5 and following. What does the Lord say? Look among the nations and be astounded, God says. I'm doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. Now be careful here. I've heard this misused so many times and misapplied. Preachers will use it to talk about revival, but you need to read the whole thing. He's not bringing revival, it's destruction. I'm doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. For behold, here's what I'm doing. I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans, that's the Babylonians. I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans, that bitter and hasty nation. He'll march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are dreaded and fearsome. So pause here. What God says he's doing is, I'm reaching over here, I'm getting a pagan nation, I'm going to manipulate that pagan nation, and I'm going to use a pagan nation to bring judgment. So there you see the sovereignty of God. Keep reading. Verse 8, their horses are swifter than leopards, more fierce than the evening wolves. Their horsemen press proudly on. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle, swift to devour. They all come for violence, all of their faces forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff. At rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress. They pile up earth. This is a siege work. Come up to a fortress, get a ramp, pile up the earth, and then they take it. Then they sweep by like the wind and go on. Guilty men, those whose own might is their God. The Lord is going to use sinners to fulfill what he wants to do. I mean, we see this when we saw this at the cross. We talked about this at the cross. That when Jesus told that the disciples would, I used this Tuesday. It's a good thing about doing pastoral preaching, by the way. So I'm preaching through a book of the Bible, preaching through Mark. They ask you to come do a sermon at chapel. They want you to do an exposition as if you were preaching through a book. And I just pull something I preached here at Hickory Grove. So I went in there and preached that Tuesday. I preached the same thing here. And one of the passages I used was Mark 14, where Jesus told the disciples they would fall, that Peter would fall. And Peter says, if I have to die with you, remember that? And Jesus said, it is written, I will strike the shepherd and the sheep will be scattered. He quoted the Bible. God predicted it. It was going to happen. And it happened through the hands of evil men, Roman soldiers, Pilate, all of the Sanhedrin. God uses whoever he wants to accomplish. That's what this is about. So that's the intro. That's the first cycle is Habakkuk's lament, God's answer. Let's go to the second cycle. The second cycle goes from chapter 1, verse 12 to chapter 2, verse 20. Listen to the lament. It's in chapter 1, verse 12 is where it starts. Are you not, this is verse 12, chapter 1, verse 12. Are you not from everlasting, O Lord my God, my Holy One? Okay, pause and just see the names of God. I just saw this today when I was studying it again. So you have here this understanding of God as eternal, God as personal, God as transcendent, God as eternal. Are you not from everlasting? God as personal. O Lord, that L-O-R-D is Yahweh, it's a personal name. My God. So you put those two together, there is this personal relationship. And my Holy One. There's this understanding of the transcendent nature of God. Right there in verse 12. Eternal, personal, transcendent. We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them, the Chaldeans, as a judgment, and you, O rock, have established them for reproof. You're using the Chaldeans to reprove God's people. You who are of purer eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong, why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? Why do you allow the bad things to happen to good people? This is a legitimate question of God. So the lament goes on all the way up into chapter 2, verse 20. I won't read all of it, but what you'll notice is chapter 2, verse 1. Let me stop there. That's the lament. That's where the lament goes, chapter 2, verse 1. I will take my stand at my watch post, station myself on the tower, look out to see what he will say to me, and what I will answer concerning my complaint. So Habakkuk offers up this prayer, and here in verse 1 he says, I will wait to hear. It's an interesting thing. I don't know if this is arrogance or humility, but it's a good reminder that God doesn't answer immediately always. One of the great things we can learn is to wait. You see that in verse 1. So the lament goes all the way up to chapter 2, verse 1, and then here comes God's answer from verse 2 to verse 20. We're still under the second cycle. So Habakkuk prays, here's the answer. Let's start in verse 2. The Lord answered me. Write the vision, make it plain on tablets, so he may run who reads it. For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. It's some encouragement from the Lord to wait. Behold, his soul is puffed up. It is not upright within him. But the righteous, man, you ought to circle verse 4, chapter 2. The righteous shall live by faith. I'm going to come back to that. That's the gospel hook in Habakkuk. So when you're preaching in the Old Testament, you're teaching the Old Testament, part of the obligation of the pastor is to make sure, this is what Spurgeon said, you take the text and you drive all the way to the cross. You find out how does it connect to Christ. If the Old Testament is there to point us to Jesus, part of the interpreter's job is to find how does that mesh, how does it get us there. Now what you don't want to do is fall off on one side of the road or the other. You can fall into one ditch that goes allegorical. You start making stuff up. That you can make everything sound like Jesus is there. That's the wrong approach. The other side is to fall off the ditch and say, well, this is history. This is just good exposition. It doesn't take us to Christ. When Jesus said that the Scripture speaks of Him. So one of the rules you use is wherever the New Testament uses the Old Testament to talk about Jesus, you can use that. However, where the Old Testament doesn't explicitly point to Christ, we find ways to make sure that is taking us there. And one of the ways in this passage would be this quote right here, the righteous shall live by faith. Because Paul's going to pick it up, I'll point it out later. He's going to use it in Romans, he's going to use it in Galatians, and the writer of Hebrews is going to use it too to point to Christ. So there is, Verse 4 is the gospel hook. The Lord continues. Moreover, wine is a traitor, an arrogant man who is never at rest. His greed is as wide as Sheol, that's hell or the grave or the place of the dead. Like death, he is never enough. He gathers for himself all nations. He collects as his own all peoples. And so then come the woes. The woes. The woes are pronouncements of judgment really, there are 5 woes. And when you're reading this, they go all the way through to verse 20. And I'd like to just go through all of them. This is God's answer, and here are the woes. Each one of these speaks to a sin we are familiar with in 2024. Each one. All right, let me start there in verse 6. Shall not all these take up taunt against him with scoffing, riddles for him, and say, here's the first woe, first one. Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own. Okay, that's lying, stealing. Woe to you. If you take something, that implies there's private property, that if you steal it, you're under the judgment of God. Woe to him who heaps up what is not his own and loads himself with pledges. Will not your debtors suddenly arise, and those awake who will make you tremble? Then you will spoil for them. Come on down to verse 9. Another woe, the second woe. Woe to him who gets evil gain for his house, to set his nest on high, to be safe from the reach of harm. You've devised shame for your house by cutting off many people. You have forfeited your life, for the stone will cry out from the wall and the beam from the woodwork. I think this is mostly about cheating. I think this will be cheating. Woe to those that are cheating, especially the poor. There's a third woe. Woe to him who builds a town with blood, founds a city on iniquity. Behold, is it not from the Lord of hosts that people labor merely for fire, nations weary themselves for nothing? For the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. The woe is for him who builds a town with blood. So I think about, there are several ways you could maybe apply this. Not interpretation, but application. Remember, when you read the Bible, you have one interpretation, what it means. Then you might have several ways to apply the text. So the way I would apply this is for cities that might be filled with crime, or one of our principles of standing on life. If we believe that life begins at conception, that if a city that is filled with abortion mills is a city built on blood. Charlotte is one of those cities that there's so many abortions that happen here. If you ever stood outside the abortion clinic, I've been there. It's a terrible demonic. The people there, the terrible things they say. You know, I was called today by Trinity Broadcasting Network. Are y'all familiar with that TBN? The Crouches lady used to have pink hair. You know what I'm talking about? Well, her son called me today. Matt Crouch. He's asked me to do a short video for talking to evangelicals to vote, because it's coming up. And so I told him, I'll do that. I think people ought to vote. I think we ought to vote. I mean, given an opportunity to do that, what would you say? I would say, as Christians, we believe there are some transcendent principles that are beyond personalities. There's some transcendent principles that we believe the Bible speaks to that are tied to creation order. When we read the Bible, and there's out of creation comes an understanding of people in the image of God. So there's our view on life. The conception is the beginning of life. So we have a principle of life. I want to vote that way the best I can. We believe that marriage is a principle given by God at creation that influences everything else in the Bible. So I want to vote in accordance with the creation ordinance of marriage between a man and a woman. That takes me to gender. I think from creation, this is not just Christian talk. This is natural law talk. I feel like that I want to vote in such a way that's going to be as close as possible to what the Bible teaches about maleness and femaleness. And I'd probably throw another one in there. Would be the separation of church and state. As Baptists, we're really big on that. The separation of church and state. We don't want the government telling us how to practice our faith or what we teach, especially as the world moves further and further away from the Bible, and we're trying to be as close as we can be to the Bible. So one of the woes, I sort of got off track there. I was practicing my speech on y'all just then. One of the woes is, woe to him who builds a town with blood. There's another woe. I'll come down. The fourth woe is in verse 15. Woe to him who makes his neighbors drink. You pour out wrath and make them drunk in order to gaze at their nakedness. And that's just debauchery. So woe to a town, woe to people that are involved in that sort of sinfulness. Okay, come on down to verse 19. That's the fifth woe. Woe to him who says to a wooden thing, awake, and to a silent stone, arise. Can this teach? Behold, it is overlaid with gold and silver, and there is no breath in it. So, you get the pattern. Chapter 1 and chapter 2, Habakkuk speaks, God answers. Chapter 2, Habakkuk speaks, God answers. There is something here in verse 20. Verse 20, when I was at Dolphin Way Baptist Church, we were at a building that was out on the interstate. Years before that, they had moved out to the interstate. Back in the mid-'80s and early '90s, it was really popular in churches to sell their property and then move out to where everybody was building new homes. And you go out there, and the idea was you got a church out there, you'll catch everybody, and your church will grow. So Dolphin Way had done that, but the building they left in town in Mobile was a beautiful old sanctuary, and over the pulpit, carved in wood, was this verse right here, verse 20. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. It's the Lord answering Habakkuk in his prayer of lament. Okay, so that's chapter 1 and 2. Chapter 3 is just a straight prayer. So when you read chapter 3, verses 1 through 19, the first two verses are mercy. Then from verse 3 to verse 15, praise. And then verse 16 through 19, the most famous passage in Habakkuk, is God's sufficiency. So let's just go through that. Let me go through that. If it sounds like I'm moving quickly, I'm going to save about 10 minutes on the end of our time tonight to open it up for any questions you might have about Southern Baptist stuff. You might not care about that stuff. If you don't, that'd be fine. We'll get out early. But it occurred to me, I've done this at a whole lot of churches. I've never actually done that at my own church. So I'll open it up if you have any questions about what's going on in the convention. Okay, so that gives you a minute to think about it. Let's go through the prayer. Chapter 3. Here's a prayer of Habakkuk the prophet, according to Shigionoth. Kyler thinks that word Shigionoth is music. He thinks that this is put to music, and maybe it is. Did y'all happen to see what Gerald did to me on Facebook? He put that, so dirty. He sent me a text. I got a text from him. He said, "Hey, we're still friends, right?" I was like, "Oh, what, you weirdo? What are you talking about?" I know what he's talking about. And then I found what he put on Facebook. Let me tell you how that happened. I was actually, we're supposed to film for the Southern Baptist Convention. I was filming something, but he had the camera. He was doing the video. And he just let it roll. I mean, so it was just recording the whole time, and I had no idea. And so he said, "I got all kind of things that you said." So he will have a job forever here at Hickory Grove. All right. Here's the prayer. Lord, I have heard the report of you and your work, O Lord, I fear. In the midst of the years, revive it. In the midst of the years, make it known. In wrath, remember mercy. I hope you'll see the gospel there. Wrath and mercy. Think about the cross of Jesus. wrath and mercy. You hear hints of the gospel in the Old Testament that God is a wrathful God that punishes sin. He is a merciful God that forgives sin. And the way He does that is satisfies His justice at the cross. Justice is satisfied, mercy is extended. When we see wrath and mercy, as Christians, we think the cross. Okay, that's part of His prayer. And then praise begins in verse 3. So you can read from verse 3 all the way down to verse 15. I won't read it all. It is recounting the greatness and the good things of God. And then in verse 11, the sun and the moon stood still in their place. He's recounting all the things that he's heard of the stories of God, what God has done, what God has done. If you're reading the Psalms, like I'm reading in Psalm 105 and 6, part of my devotional in the morning, and the psalmist is just talking about the story of God bringing His people out of Egypt. So all through the Bible you hear the writers say, remember what God did, remember what God, that is a really good pattern for us. And then in verse 16, 17, 18, and 19 is a statement of God's sufficiency. So verses 1 and 2 is mercy. Verses 3 through 15 is praise. And then verse 16, 17, 18, and 19 is the sufficiency of God. Hey, you should go there and underline those verses. You're going to need those verses. I promise you're going to need them. What does he say? I'll start in verse 17. You probably have heard it before. Though the fig tree should not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, the produce of the olive fail, and the fields yield no food, the flock be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls. Yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will take joy in the God of my salvation. God, the Lord, is my strength. He makes my feet like the deer's. He makes me to tread on high places. That is Habakkuk at the end of everything. He's been complaining. Why do you let bad things happen to good people? Where are you when this goes on? Where is the justice? At the end of it, God's sovereignty has settled his heart, and he realizes, regardless of what has happened, my hope, my trust, my strength is in the Lord. Brothers and sisters, those few verses tucked away in Habakkuk will be a foundation for your soul to stand on. So what are the themes? Okay, we've sort of gone through the book. Let's talk about the themes. A couple of themes to consider. I'll give them to you. The first one is based on chapter 2, verse 4. God is just and merciful, even though we may not understand His ways. God is just and merciful, even though we might not understand His ways. That's one. Let me give you a second theme that runs through Habakkuk. Wickedness will be punished, and the righteous will eventually see God's justice. Wickedness will be punished, and the righteous will eventually see God's justice. I mean, even if you're not a Christian, you understand that just natural law, natural theology reveals that there is a right and a wrong, and that right will end out. Okay, third thing. I don't know if this is a good one or not. No, they're all good, but what I mean is this may be confusing. God uses some wicked nations to punish other wicked nations. So God used the Babylonians, they're pagans, to punish the Assyrians, they're pagans. And then ultimately, God will judge all nations. So God will use some wicked nations to punish other wicked nations. Ultimately, God will judge all nations. And then the key phrase, if you want a key phrase, those are three themes. If you want a key phrase, I think in Habakkuk, it's in chapter 2, verse 4. It's what I pointed out to you. Chapter 2, verse 4, it's really verse 4b, but the righteous will live by his faith. The righteous will live by his faith. Okay, so zoom out. We're trying to do some interpretation. Now, let's do application. What are some lessons we can learn from reading the book of Habakkuk? I'll give you just a couple. Here's the first one. There's great value in writing your prayers down. There's value in written prayer. There's value. I haven't done it all my life, but my whole married life. And so I can go back and see what the Lord did. Like I can go back, and I went back recently and looked back, what was I thinking before we came to Hickory Grove? So I go and trace the thought and the prayer. What was I asking God for? For me, for Connie, for the boys, for Hickory Grove. What was I asking? Then I went back even further, like to 1996, when Connie and I, we knew we couldn't have children. So what was I praying then for her, for us, for children, and then when we were called, and tracing the Lord's hand? There is great value. If you'll do that, even starting now till whenever, you can go back and see, you write down your own personal spiritual history of how God has worked through hard times, good times, beautiful times. There's great value in written prayers. And I'll just add to that, there's great value in you writing down the blessings of God. What God has done. Write them down so you can see them. The provision of God. Even if it's something small. We made it back last night. We got on an airplane in Louisville, Kentucky. Sat there for an hour and a half at the gate. Police came on the plane. They hauled some guy off. I think I want to get off of this airplane. We stayed on the plane, landed in Charlotte. We were an hour on the tarmac, went to the baggage. I was so glad to be home when I got home last night. And so to thank God for getting us here. So I would just suggest to you, list them out and write them down so you can go back and see. This is what God has done for you. He provided for you. Here's the second lesson. Waiting is a hard necessity. One of the lessons we learn in Habakkuk is waiting is a hard necessity. It is a necessary thing. You guys understand the doctrine of providence, right? Providence. Trusting God's sovereignty is this. I can look into the future and say, God is in control, I'm going to be okay. That's trusting God's sovereignty. Providence is very similar. Providence is you turning around. You turn around and look back. And you say, okay, I see the Lord's hand in that. I can see the history. I can see what God has done. Sometimes it's a smiling providence. This is what the Puritans used to say. Sometimes it's a smiling providence. Things went so well. It was so good. It was a great time. We had a wonderful vacation. No problems. Sometimes it is a frowning or a hard providence. It was so hard to walk through, but it was still a providence. God was in it. You see, some of that is waiting. Sometimes it's just waiting. Waiting's a hard necessity. A third lesson. Number 3, we have no idea what God is doing at this very moment. As part of Habakkuk's complaint, we want to peek behind the veil. The truth of the matter is, we don't know what he's doing. Our obligation is to pursue holiness, to live Christ-like, to seek to honor him, to be good to one another, to do those basic kind of Christian things. I mean, really, when people ask, especially young men and women will ask, how do you know what God's will is? Like, I don't know God's will for my life. Here's what I would say. It's 1 Thessalonians, God's will for your life is your own sanctification. That's what the Bible says. Sanctification is you growing in holiness. If you make that the pursuit of your life, then the decisions become easier, and you don't think, okay, if I miss this, do I miss an opportunity? You trust that God has put all these things in your life, every hurdle, every good time. He's doing that for your own sanctification. Here's a fourth one. God uses suffering to teach us character. God, I wish you could just read it in a book. It'd be a lot easier. But the way it is seemed in the Bible and in life, it feels as if God uses suffering in His people to teach them character, to teach humility, to teach dependence. I'm trying to think of like this, the lessons that we've learned since Nate's death, since my youngest son died. What are the lessons? You learn the value of church. You learn you're not alone. You learn dependence on God. You learn humility. You learn a sense of grace to other people who have maybe trouble with the child. You learn that the Lord is good in difficulty. You learn that you wouldn't want to not be a Christian and not have the church. And so God uses. Don't hate it, because God is you're going to look back and see providence. You're going to see it. And you're going to say, the Lord was making me into something there. He was using that. All right, here's the fifth lesson. Fifth lesson is that God is just. God is just. That's why we need the gospel. God is just. The Old Testament teaches God is just. It's good for us to remember that the Lord is fully just, and His justice is satisfied by the death of His Son on the cross. That is there for justice to be satisfied, that He might extend mercy to you and I. God is just. Sixth lesson. God is worthy of your praise. Write it down and just find ways to praise Him. And praise and thanksgiving go together. God is worthy of your praise. Here's the seventh one. This is based on the very end of Habakkuk. It's my favorite part. That is that God is sufficient for you. God is sufficient for you. That God is going to carry you through every bit of that. He will see you through. That the hardship, the frowning providence is there, and it's still providence. It is God, even if it hurts. And through all of that, God is sufficient for you. And when you read the end of Habakkuk, you find that you can find joy there. You can find strength. Like part of what I feel like my obligation as a pastor, I have several sort of roles. When it comes to Sunday morning preaching and teaching, part of what I want to do is use the Bible to teach the people God has given me to find their sufficiency. That God is sufficient. To be able to pick up the New Testament and read it and have your soul fed and make it through the week and be joyful in hard circumstances. That's a lesson you find from the book of Habakkuk. And going back to Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 4, that is the gospel hook. You'll find that in Romans chapter 1, verse 17. You'll find it in Galatians chapter 3, verse 11. If you have a study Bible, it's probably down at the bottom of your page. And you'll find it in Hebrews chapter 10, verse 38, that the righteous will live by faith. And each time it's used in the New Testament, every time it's quoted, there's an emphasis on a different part. So the righteous live by faith, that faith makes us righteous. How are we made righteous? It is through faith in what Christ has done. The righteous live by faith. Take our faith and we put it in the God of the Bible that holds us, that saves us, that keeps us. The righteous live by faith, that in Christ we are able to live. You're able to go into Thursday with a renewed hope and faith in God's goodness found in Jesus. Habakkuk. It's a great little book. 2 cycles, chapter 3, great prayer. It is leaning into the goodness and sufficiency of Christ.